Hey guys, I do believe we're live. I think. I don't know. Um, yeah, so basically I was asked a good few times over like the likes of muscle definition for the Dye-Sub bases and how you do it. Now, what you're looking at here is my Red Ranger pattern. Now, I started off with a muscle based pattern a while back from 4neodesigns.com. I will include the link below again if you want to hit him up. Mark is a cool guy. Um, Basically, what I started with was his, and then when I kind of decided that I wanted to try a different style of patterning, I had to create my own. Now, the best way of getting started is basically having your blank pattern, and for some reason my layer selection has disappeared here. And I said that I was going to take time to set up my workspace. I feel silly. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Layers. There we go. Yes. So as you can see, that this is made up of several layers, but these are patterning things, and you don't need to worry about that right now. Let's just get down to the basic shape here. Okay. So this was originally this was 4Neo Designs muscle base, and then I modified it heavily pattern wise and shading wise, and I used this to essentially no to I use this to essentially create new types of highlights and shading. And that's what this tutorial is today. This is not a tutorial of how to create the actual pattern, because this is my pattern. So we're not teaching you how to do that today. We're just teaching you how to actually paint the musculature onto a base. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a blank base. Now, yeah, if it seems a little slow, it really isn't. These are just 6 foot tall JPEGs, or well, TIFF files. So you're actually layering about like 12, 13 JPEGs that are 6 foot tall on top of one another. Your computer's gonna be worked very hard. Let's just put it that way. So we're getting a large brush, and we're just going to do this. I'm not going to be saving this, so don't worry. Um, right. So as I said, all we're doing here right now is figuring out what to do. So now this muscle overlay here is what is a good idea to use for a base. You could get an anatomy file, like front and back musculature, like anatomy diagrams and stuff, to get real musculature for the purposes of defining where everything needs to go. Like your shoulder blades, your chest muscles, abdominals, biceps, triceps, and shoulders, the deltoids, if you will. It is kind of important to know something, like to know a bit about anatomy as you're doing this. So that's why it helps to have a diagram of the human anatomy as you do it. Now, what you can do as well is you could overlay said human anatomy over your pattern. Now, this is based on the Sam Raimi pattern that is widely available. for Spider-Man designs, and basically I have created it that is more of a standard bodysuit design with standard raglan sleeves, and so there's none of the extra material in at the shoulder here. The mask, this particular pattern is not used to create a mask. This is to create a suit that would either have a high neck or a non-existent neck. So that's where this differs from your regular Spider-Man patterns. But overall, it still creates the same body profile. So if I were starting from scratch again, I would probably do something similar here. Now, what we're doing is we're going to get our brush and we're going to start to paint. I've done enough talking, so let's get started. Okay, so you're going to need a semi-large brush. Maybe about there. No, probably actually bigger again. So as I said, the chat is live. I am able to see it. So if you have any questions as I'm going, feel free to jump in. Now, the way I do muscle shading and highlights is I create shadow as if you are wearing material. There's a lot of muscle based designs that are really sharp muscular definition, and when you're wearing clothes, that just doesn't happen. It's not something that exists in nature. So you want something that has much softer definition to give it the idea that you're muscular beneath clothing. So it just gives it a more realistic effect. Now, some people like the sharp definition that they give it, like for Spider-Man patterns, as Spider-Man is the most popular spandex pattern, as we all know. Some people like comic style shading, which can be really cool. If done, if done well, but that has really sharp definition, because I saw a John Romita style Spider-Man dye-sub pattern, and because John Romita Senior was a great fan of cross-hatch shading, so that was a very specific style, and so it needed to be sharp. But whereas modern designs, especially when it comes to let's say the Man of Steel designs, even that was like a molded that was a molded suit. The airbrushing would still use a more subtle type of definition than really sharp muscular definition, because again, it's not something that happens with material over muscles. It tends to want to take the path of least resistance, which is not going underneath the pectoral muscle and then like going around each individual abdominal muscle. That's just not how it happens. So anyway, again, I've been talking too much, so let's just get started. So bigger brush. Now you're going to want to make sure that the hardness is set to 0 on your brush. You're also going to want to set the opacity to about, I don't know, 20%, and you'll see why in a minute. So I have a faint I have the faint muscle base just set there, just so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to create a new layer again, and this will be my shadow layer. So we have black set as our color, and literally all we're going to do is we're going to pick out the areas that will be in shade, which will be the bottom half of muscles, underneath the chin. So yeah, for the purposes of this, I'm going to just focus on the torso, front and back, okay? So at first this will all seem very messy, and another tip is not to take your finger off the mouse button as you draw. You make this as continuous as possible, and you will see why soon enough. Because you'll think, wow, that's an awful lot of, definition for one area. And again, you'll see why. Okay. This is going to be messy. I'm doing this quickly as I can just to demonstrate. Okay. Get under there. Now you see I let go of the mouse button there. And as you can see, it starts to layer up and get darker, which is an effect that we're trying to achieve overall, just not on this first layer of definition. So we'll just darken around here because we're going to get some crotch definition. Okay, so into the back muscles and the lats. Okay. And trapezoid muscles. And then there's like a gap between the shoulder blades and the lat muscles. We're going to highlight that. And it doesn't matter if the shading isn't symmetrical, because guess what? Neither are people. People are not symmetrical. I know. Crazy thought, right? So you're like, that doesn't look like muscles. That looks like a great big heaping mess. And you'd be right. So now we're going to start to define it. Okay, so we now have a brush that is less than half the size of the first brush. And the reason we're doing this is now we're going to go back over certain areas, but with more definition, but in smaller areas. So we start to pick out things like the collarbones, right under the pecs, and only a portion of in between them. I'm going to do that. Okay. In and around the abdominal wall. Again, this is just quick. I'm not even zooming in here. If I was zooming in, I would be going into much greater detail. But as you can see, it's starting to resemble something. Okay. And each time you go lower with the brush, you need to concentrate a little bit more on detail and where the mouse would be going. Another thing to be very aware of is where everything sits. Like for instance, it's very important, especially around the legs, that if the shading on the inner thigh here doesn't match up with the shading on the back of the around the hamstrings, you'll have a very noticeable line along your seam, and it doesn't look that good. So we shall endeavor to move on. So again, we are picking out areas in a smaller surface area than what we started with. And so now we're starting to create new details as we go. And as you can see, as I'm drawing, the actual muscle base that I started from has become not very relevant anymore. But that's okay, because you'd probably be working with a much more detailed anatomical overlay than I will be for this tutorial. So, again, we will go smaller again, and this time I will zoom in because I need to see what I'm doing now. And we'll just bring down the opacity just ever so slightly of the brush. And the reason for this is now we are picking out much finer no, screw that. So we're going to undo that for a second. Let's keep the opacity the same as it was. Maybe even a little darker. Now, we are picking out strong, defined details. And you might think that these look incredibly dark, but this is not actually the final step. Now, you can add as many layers of detail as you wish to your muscle definition. The more layers that you add with more subtle gradients, the more natural it will look. I generally just go with 3, as you know, sometimes it's not actually necessary to do much more than that, but that is up to yourself. Everyone does things differently. So, as I said, this stream will be made available later for anyone who needs to check it over a bit more thoroughly. Okay. I'm going to use this opportunity to create a more defined oblique structure shape, because underneath the arms, the reason I didn't go as heavily there is because you wouldn't generally see that in as much when the muscle group is covered by cloth. Again, as I said, this is quick, messy muscle definition tutorial. I get a nice little shadow triangle for the chin. This person is obviously very they have a chin with a left-hand bias for sure. Now we draw a nice defined collarbone. And you're all probably thinking this looks terrible. But you will see soon enough. I'm going to appear down here. So everything is nice and soft when it comes to the definition if you want a subtle musculature beneath clothing. You can make the lines sharp, as I said. If you so choose, you can make the lines sharp. That is entirely up to you as an artist. Now, if you get rid of that, it looks completely different on the white. But we're not done yet. So, see the way I have one that says highlights? We're going to do some highlights now. Now, highlights, all that is you're switching your color. And because white isn't picked up as easy, we're going to change the opacity up. And we're going to go right back up to, let's say, 350, because it helps to have a much bigger brush. Because there's more areas where light hits on musculature than shadow. Unless you have like gigantic pec muscles. But then again, in the terms of breast shading and things like that for female dye-sub or musculature patterns, yes, there will be a much larger shadow portion underneath the breast. So we shall continue. So this is just getting areas where light would hit. So we always treat that the light is coming from directly above. At least I do. Obviously, in this larger sort of portion, don't go too nuts with it. We'll just give ourselves a bit of crotchal definition. So you're basically, rule of thumb, just go above shadow lines. Makes sense, right? Sometimes below, along here, obviously, there's going to be raised portions depending on how muscular your character is. I must be doing a good tutorial. You guys are awful quiet. Now, and again, we're going to reduce the brush size to about half. And we're going to go again. And this time in much smaller areas. Because we are again picking up highlighted areas. Now I've seen some really impressive muscle definition on these designs where people have actually picked out the separate muscle fibers, let's say across the chest, because muscle fibers are very like large on the chest, as it's one of the larger muscle groups, aside from your butt. And yeah, they do the separate muscle fibers, which is something that looks really cool if your character was going to be, uh, something like a Titan suit, or I've seen used to great effect on certain characters like Kratos and things like that. So if your character's going to be, bare skin, and you don't want to bare your skin, or you just don't want to spend the time doing like body paint, which is totally understandable. Um, a dye sub pattern is sometimes the way to go. So the muscle fibers, if you want to go really detailed with your muscle pattern there, it would make a lot of sense to do so. Again, you guys must be like thinking, this is super messy. It doesn't look good at all. It will. Trust me. Okay, so we have that line of definition, and now we're going to go much smaller again, and we're going to pick out details. Okay, so we have the corners where the bones stick out on your collarbone, and just another bit there, a bit there. We're going to draw a line. Sometimes it helps, if you kind of go a little bit cartoony with it. So we have this here, this here. Again, doesn't have to be symmetrical, but you can do one half and copy it over with the magic of Photoshop if you so choose. Just make sure that sides line up. Okay, so we're looking pretty good here. Did not mean to go up into that part. It's fine. Fine. If I want, I can put that underneath there. It's fine. But generally, yeah, we'll put the highlights above, because light always beats shadow. But without light, there can be no shadow. How philosophical of me. Okay. So we're nearly done here on this pattern. Okay, so now we have a great big mess. Awesome. What do we do with it? We're going to blur it, but I want to show you something. So we're going to take that white layer that I created. Okay, and I'm going to turn it red. Why? Because I wish to show you something. Okay, so we're going to turn that red. Now, without using this muscle overlay here, we're going to get rid of the muscle definition. I will show you. Oh, okay. I will show you what my Power Ranger suit would look like without, without any kind of muscle definition. So that needs to be multiply. Forgot about that. Now, this is what it looks like without muscle definition. This is what this is what it looks like with it when I get rid of that. I'm missing something here. I need to put in that as well. Oh yeah, that was it. Okay. So, that's what it looks like with it. So we're creating this effect now in 2 seconds. So we're getting rid of that and that. And we're going to put in that. Okay? So again, this is what the Power Rangers design looks like without muscle definition. Except the highlights there. Oops. Now, we're going to put in our 2 lines of muscle definition here. Yes, that's really obvious, but it's not going to be as obvious now in 2 seconds, right? So we're going to change the blending mode to multiply. At least maybe for the darkness. We will need to change it to overlay or hard light, soft light. So just play around with these. I do remember. Huh, cool. Hard light, maybe. Lighter color. I'm playing around. Yeah, screen. Screen is what I'm gonna do. Okay. So right now we have kind of very cartoony. That's fine. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna do Gaussian blur. Maybe not that extreme. So let's say 10 pixels. And the same again for white. I don't actually know if that did anything. But not really. Okay, let's do it manually on the white. There we go, that's a bit better. Let's say 45 pixels on this one. Now, you might still be thinking, wow, that's still really evident. And you'd be right. So we're going to take the suit diamonds thing as well. And we're going to build a layer on top of that, unless we could... no, we'll keep going as we're going. So we shall take a layer by copy. And let's grab that selection again. And another layer via copy. So those 2 layers. This is just for expediency's sake. And now we're going to put it above that. And we have this. So, yes, it looks a bit strange. So we're going to blur that again. There we go. Now, we're nearly done. And so, we shall start by doing some of this again. Yeah, might have been as well to do the blurring. Anyway, so we're going to make these somewhat less opaque. These are again numbers that you should play around with to get the look that you desire. But as you can see already, now I would probably myself put the highlights down quite a bit, because I feel that if the highlights are too obvious, then they just won't look right. So we'll go for maybe about 65%, and then just that. Now, as you can see, that doesn't look so bad now, does it? And it dramatically changes the look of the pattern. Obviously now, because it was done quickly, it doesn't have the same finished look to it. But I think it looks pretty good. It's pretty okay. Like, not gonna win any awards or anything, but it's very clearly defined. There's kind of more of a cartoony feel to that, I will admit. But if you put in the other overlay, if you use your anatomy diagram and maybe use some of the same techniques of blurring and different opacity and things like that, you could get something that looks pretty cool. So hopefully you've learned something from this. I would love to see what you guys can come up with when designing your own patterns. So if you found this in any way useful or exciting or wonderful, let me know in the comments. If you would like to see me more tutorials of this type, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. And yeah, till next time. See you later.